So there's some big news breaking right before I came on air today. The Supreme Court has been dodging any further gay rights cases like the plague for such a long time. They've been doing it for a while now. There's been, 3 or 4 different cases where they could have taken up the issue of gay rights again, but they're like, thanks, but no thanks. But now they've decided that they're finally going to go ahead and make a decision once and for all on the issue. Huffington Post reports, quote, "The court said it would specifically address 2 questions. Does the 14th Amendment require a state to license a marriage between 2 people of the same sex? And does the 14th Amendment require a state to recognize a marriage between 2 people of the same sex when their marriage was lawfully licensed and performed out of state?" So this is the big one here. All the previous cases, they've kind of been dancing around the main issue. But this is the big one. This is the main issue here. So what they've ruled before is that the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, is unconstitutional, because what the Defense of Marriage Act did is it mandated that in no state can you have a federally recognized same-sex marriage. But they came along and said, actually, no, what you can do is you have to, for the federal government, they have to listen to whatever each individual state wants. So if Mississippi does not want gay marriage, okay, then they don't have to have it. And if New York does want gay marriage, okay, they get to have it. And if a gay couple gets married in New York, then the federal government needs to recognize it. So it was a step in the right direction, but it was also, to a certain extent, a slight dodge, because what they're saying is we are not going to rule, or what they said is we are not going to rule on the bigger question of, are we going to make it so that the federal government has to accept gay marriages in every state? Are we going to make it so that Alabama, even if they don't want to marry gay couples, the state does not have a right to tell gay couples, hey, we're not going to allow you to get married? I think that either way, it's going to be a close decision. Okay, either way, this is going to be tight. But if you had a gun to my head and you said, take a guess, I lean towards, like, I'm 60% on the side of they're going to rule against it. Now, I think on the second part of it, they're going to rule for it. So on the idea that a state needs to recognize a marriage between 2 people of the same sex when their marriage was licensed in another state, I think on that one, they'll say, yeah. So if you live in Mississippi, but you travel to California to get married, and then you go back to Mississippi, I think they'll acknowledge that, right? But I'm not sure that they're going to go as far as to acknowledge that, hey, you need to, like, perform same-sex marriages in every state because it's an individual right protected by the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. And the reason why is this. The 14th Amendment, it wasn't about gays at the time. It just wasn't, right? Nobody had that in mind. The thing is that you would have to interpret it after the fact, interpret it simply by the letter of the law, if you will, the letter of the amendment, where it says, hey, we grant equal protection under the law. And I don't think they're willing. Most of the people on the court don't have that living document ideology, where it's like, okay, let's interpret this to coincide with the times, and let's interpret it by what it says. You'll have assholes like Scalia and Clarence Thomas. They'll say, no, when it was passed, they weren't thinking of gays, so we shouldn't think of gays today. End of conversation. So I think it might fall short. But look, man, at some point, we are going to get it. It's just a matter of how we're going to get it. Maybe it does happen through the Supreme Court. I'd be ecstatic if it does. But you can't fight inevitable social changes like this for long, because it becomes too overwhelming. The population becomes too much on one side of the issue, and they basically realize, the people realize that the system is just operating off of momentum, that we just have this system set up that was essentially put into place by our grandparents who didn't know dick and their grandparents who didn't know dick, and they just acted a certain way, and they had a lot of their beliefs that were based on religion. A lot of it was based on backwards puritanical cultures, and they just acted how they acted because it's how they acted, and they thought that was a good enough reason. Well, we're getting to the point now where we're westernized enough and civilized enough where the people realize, well, yeah, there's really no logical reason why we shouldn't give gay couples the same tax rights and the same Social Security rights as other people. It seems like it's flat out discriminatory. So it's going to happen eventually. Right now, 59% of the American people are on the side of gay marriage. That number is only going to get better and better and better. So it's going to happen, but I don't know how it's going to happen. Is it going to go state by state? Maybe it will. And if it does go state by state, how will it go state by state? Through the legislatures? Less likely that, but if each state does fall individually, it'll probably go through judges in the states who strike down the bans that they have on marriage equality in the states, and they say this is unconstitutional. And then, or maybe it will just be the Supreme Court that says, okay, you know what, it's illegal all over the place. Or maybe it will have a Democratic president at one point and a Democratic Congress with balls where they stand up and say, fuck it, no, we're passing it today. I think if the Democrats really pushed on this issue, they would either win on it, given a certain amount of time, or they would absolutely crush the Republicans on an issue like this and start winning election after election. Because when you have 59% of the American people with you and it's a basic, like, be a decent person kind of issue, I would make this a campaign issue all day long. I would call press conferences about it. I would do media tours about it. I would say, goddamn, Republicans are fascists that don't want to give people equal rights. Look at the parallels between this and the civil rights movement. Can you believe that the Republicans are copying the moves of the segregationists of the 1950s and 1960s? If you message that issue and you hammer it home, bring it up and then bring it up again and then bring it up again in Congress. And what happened? They'll keep slapping it down, slap it down, slap it down. But every time they slap it down, you got to come out and say, how dare they slap it down? Can you believe what they did? This is unbelievable. The history books are going to judge you and they're going to say you were on the wrong side. If you keep hammering, eventually you can pass it through Congress. You can get it through the federal government. Or again, if it doesn't happen that way, it'll happen other ways. But you can't fight the trends of history. I mean, that's when you look at the history of conservatism and liberalism. Conservatism is basically the idea that at any point in history, you take a snapshot of how everything works and you go, okay, now it's perfect. Let's not change anything. Whereas liberalism is more rational in the sense that it goes, of course everything's not perfect. That's stupid. There's plenty of things that are wrong. Let's fix these things and let's push for change in these areas. People are on that side now. People are beginning to scoff at people who are anti-gay marriage for religious reasons and cultural reasons, and it's just a matter of time until they have to step aside. I just don't know if it's going to happen through the Supreme Court. I hope it does, though.